Pilot Story. Chapter 1. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support more cinematic stories like this one. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sun seems hesitant to rise, holding back its warmth behind a veil of clouds. Michael's eyes opened to the familiar sound of his alarm, yet nothing about this day felt familiar. He had been a pilot for years, soaring above cities, clouds, and storms, but he had never faced turbulence like this before. Turbulence in his own life. The apartment was silent, too silent, except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the distant sounds of a city slowly awakening. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face with his hands. Wrinkles had begun to etch themselves along his forehead, and the slight tremor in his fingers betrayed the weariness of decades spent balancing precision with adrenaline. Ever since he was a child, Michael had loved the sky. He had built model airplanes, collected miniature replicas, and dreamed of feeling the wind lift him above the earth. As a boy, he spent hours in his room, constructing aircraft from balsa wood and glue, imagining the roar of engines and the thrill of acrobatic maneuvers. Now that childhood passion had transformed into a career, but with each passing year, the joy of flight had been tempered by responsibility, routine, and the silent weight of personal sacrifices. Today, Michael would fly a commercial aircraft filled with passengers who trusted him with their lives. Yet he could not shake the creeping thought that he was no longer in control, not of the skies, and certainly not of his own life. Breakfast was mechanical. Coffee, toast, a glance at the newspaper that carried the usual mixture of mundane and tragic news. Each headline seemed to mock him, a reminder of the fragility of existence. The plane would not wait for his indecision, and the passengers did not care for the pilot's doubts. The world demanded performance, precision, and composure, and Michael knew he had to deliver all three. The drive to the airport was uneventful, but Michael's mind was a storm. Memories of past flights collided with fears of what could go wrong, not in the cockpit, but in the corridors of his own life. He thought of his colleagues, some younger, some older, each carrying their own burdens and secrets. Pilots were expected to be heroes, calm under pressure, able to make life or death decisions in seconds. Yet they were human, flawed, vulnerable. At the airport, the morning haze clung to the tarmac like a blanket. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, planes taxied with mechanical precision, and announcements echoed in the cavernous terminal. Michael walked toward his aircraft, a Boeing 737 that had seen countless journeys, each takeoff and landing recorded in the invisible ledger of experience. He reached the cockpit, ran through the pre-flight checklist, and inhaled deeply. Flying demanded absolute focus. Checklists, instruments, communication protocols, all needed attention. But even amidst this disciplined routine, Michael's mind wandered. He thought about the families of the passengers, about their hopes and fears, and he wondered if they knew the human behind the uniform. He was not just a pilot. He was a man with dreams, regrets, and mistakes, none of which were visible from the passenger seats. As the aircraft prepared for departure, Michael felt the familiar adrenaline surge. The engines roared to life, vibrations running through the fuselage, a tangible reminder of the power beneath his control. Yet, for all the technical mastery, the feeling of vulnerability remained. One miscalculation, one moment of distraction, and everything could unravel. The flight began smoothly. Clouds stretched like cotton across the horizon, the sun peeking through in golden rays that illuminated the cabin with a gentle warmth. Passengers relaxed, unaware of the intricate dance of physics and precision happening in the cockpit. Michael guided the plane with steady hands, monitoring instruments, adjusting flaps, communicating with air traffic control. Hours passed in a seamless rhythm, a blend of skill and routine, punctuated by brief moments of awe at the beauty of the world below. Yet, as he navigated through the skies, memories of personal sacrifices gnawed at him. Relationships he had neglected, moments with his children missed, friendships left to drift. The thrill of flight had often come at the cost of human connection, and the weight of those choices pressed heavily upon him. He remembered the birthday parties he had missed, the school recitals he had failed to attend, and the countless conversations postponed indefinitely. Mid-flight, turbulence shook the plane. Michael's hands gripped the yoke, eyes scanning the instruments, calculating, adjusting. The passengers murmured, some gripping armrests, others closing eyes in silent prayer. The storm was a metaphor, a mirror of his inner turmoil, testing his resolve, patience, and skill. Every jolt reminded him of the fragility of life and the precarious balance he maintained every day, not just in the air but in the decisions that shaped his personal world. Hours passed, skies cleared, and the aircraft descended toward its destination. Landing required precision, calm, and flawless coordination. Michael guided the plane down, each second stretching into eternity, until wheels kissed the runway with controlled force. A collective exhale filled the cabin, passengers smiled, and life seemed restored. Momentarily, at least. After landing, Michael sat in the cockpit for a few moments longer, eyes closed, reflecting. He had done his job, performed with excellence, and yet the sense of incompleteness remained. Success in the sky had not repaired the gaps on the ground, the absences, the missed moments with loved ones. He knew that while the flight had been flawless, his personal journey was far from it. Stepping out of the cockpit, he was greeted by ground crew, colleagues, and a few familiar faces. Conversations were polite, professional, yet Michael felt a distance, a separation between the professional he embodied and the man he truly was. The uniform could command respect, but it could not bridge the gaps of intimacy lost over years of prioritizing the sky over human connection. Evening came, and Michael returned home. The apartment greeted him with the same silence he had left in the morning. Dinner was simple, solitude the main companion. He stared at photographs of his younger self, his family, and the model airplanes that still occupied a shelf. Memories collided with regrets, hopes mingled with fears. The sky had always been his refuge, but it had also been his escape from responsibility, from emotional labor, from the messy complexities of life on the ground. Michael knew that tomorrow, and the day after, the pattern would continue. Flights, schedules, responsibilities, expectations. But tonight, in the quiet of his home, he allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability, acknowledging the human beneath the uniform. He understood that every takeoff demanded courage, but so did every honest conversation, every attempt at repairing broken bonds, every effort to reconnect with the lives he had touched and sometimes neglected. Pilot Story, Chapter 2. Before we continue, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more deep cinematic stories about the human side of high-pressure careers. The next morning arrived with the persistent gray light of dawn, a pale reflection of the city's endless activity below. Michael rose from his bed with a sense of déjà vu, the weight of routine settling over him like a familiar, yet unwelcome, blanket. The alarm's shrill cry marked the start of another day, another cycle of responsibility, precision, and unspoken tension. He brewed his coffee in silence, the aroma barely penetrating the fog of thoughts that lingered in his mind. Memories of yesterday's flight lingered, yet they were overlaid with a creeping anxiety about the next one. It was not fear of flying, that he had long mastered. It was the fear of becoming hollowed by repetition, by decades of perfection masking the absence of meaningful connection. The drive to the airport was uneventful in its external calm, yet internally, Michael felt a storm brewing. His mind wandered to his colleagues, to passengers whose faces blurred together after countless flights, to the invisible ledger of lives he had guided safely through the sky. He wondered how many of them truly saw him as a human being rather than a uniform, a figure of authority and assurance. At the hangar, the morning light glinted off the polished fuselage of the 737. Ground crew moved like clockwork, their efficiency a silent testament to the discipline of aviation. Michael ran through the pre-flight checklist with methodical precision, muscles remembering years of routine. Yet, each action, though familiar, felt heavier today. The weight of responsibility was tangible, pressing against his chest like an invisible hand. Takeoff was a ritual. Engines roared, vibrations coursed through the body of the plane, and the city fell away beneath them, replaced by clouds and the vast expanse of sky. Michael guided the aircraft with a deftness born of experience, but amidst the technical mastery, his thoughts drifted to the sacrifices that had brought him here. Birthdays missed, family dinners forgone, friendships allowed to fade. The sky had been his sanctuary, but also his escape from life's messy obligations. Mid-flight, the turbulence came without warning. The plane shuddered, passengers murmured, and Michael's hands instinctively gripped the yoke. The storm outside was mirrored by the storm inside, testing both his technical skills and his mental endurance. Every adjustment, every subtle maneuver, was a negotiation between physics and human fallibility. He thought of young pilots he had mentored, those full of ambition and dreams unscathed by the creeping weight of experience. He had once been like them, eager and unburdened, seeing the sky as infinite opportunity. Now, he carried the invisible scars of countless flights, each takeoff a reminder of the delicate balance between control and chaos. As the storm subsided, Michael allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. The clouds parted, sunlight spilled through in brilliant streaks, and for a fleeting instant the world seemed to pause. Passengers looked out of their windows, marveling at the beauty below, unaware of the tension, the calculation, the mastery it had taken to maintain that serenity. Descending toward the destination, Michael reflected on the duality of his life. The cockpit demanded perfection, yet outside it, imperfection ruled. Relationships strained under the weight of absence, promises postponed, and opportunities missed. The life of a pilot was glamorous in perception but taxing in reality, a constant oscillation between exhilaration and isolation. The landing was precise, textbook perfect, executed with the calm composure of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of control. Wheels kissed the runway, brakes engaged, and the aircraft taxied toward the gate. A wave of relief washed over Michael, though it was tempered by the awareness that the personal storms remained untouched. In the quiet moments after passengers disembarked, Michael lingered in the cockpit. The empty cabin was a stark contrast to the bustling airport outside. He allowed himself to acknowledge the emotional fatigue that accompanied years of excellence. The uniform had been a shield, a symbol of mastery, but it could not mend the fractures in the private life he had often neglected. Back at his apartment that evening, the silence enveloped him. He ate a simple meal, stared at photographs of his family, and allowed memories to wash over him. The model airplanes on his shelf, relics of childhood fascination, seemed to whisper reminders of dreams both realized and postponed. Flying had given him freedom, achievement, and respect, but also isolation, regret, and the ache of missed moments. He lay in bed that night with eyes wide open, contemplating the invisible ledger of life experiences, the takeoffs and landings mirrored by decisions left unresolved, conversations delayed, and connections strained. Tomorrow would bring another flight, another test of skill, yet tonight demanded reflection, acknowledgement, and an honest confrontation with the human beneath the uniform. Michael understood that mastery in the sky did not equate to mastery of life. Each flight was a microcosm of balance, precision, and responsibility, yet the broader narrative, family, friendship, love, required courage of a different sort. Courage to reconnect, to repair, to face vulnerability, and to navigate the turbulence of human emotion with the same meticulous attention once reserved for instruments and altitudes. Pilot Story, Chapter 3. Before we dive in, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more cinematic emotional stories about life, work, and the human struggles behind the uniforms. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fuel and machinery from the airport below. Michael awoke earlier than necessary, driven by a familiar mix of anticipation and unease. Each day had become a careful choreography of habits, rituals designed to prepare his body and mind for the unpredictable demands of the cockpit. Coffee, a cold shower, mental rehearsals of takeoffs and landings, all orchestrated to maintain control over an otherwise chaotic life. As he drove toward the terminal, the city woke gradually around him. Neon signs flickered, delivery trucks rumbled past, and early commuters navigated the streets with a kind of mechanical precision. Michael's mind, however, wandered far above the city, among clouds and stratospheric currents, to places where his years of experience weighed like invisible ballast. Inside the cockpit, the familiar instruments blinked with readiness. Michael ran his hands over the controls, feeling the subtle vibrations of the metal in the engines, a symphony only a pilot could appreciate. The checklist was completed almost without thought. Muscle memory guided every action, every switch, every lever. Yet, beneath the calm professionalism, a subtle tension simmered. Today was not like other flights. There was a nagging awareness of something unspoken, a sense that life was shifting beneath the rigid schedules and technical mastery. Perhaps it was a passenger's brief glance, a stewardess's hurried remark, or merely the weight of unexamined solitude that had accumulated over decades. Michael could not pinpoint it. He only knew the feeling, a low hum in the background of consciousness that refused to be ignored. Takeoff approached with its familiar combination of excitement and precision. Engines roared, the plane surged forward, and Michael guided it into the air with fluid, practiced movements. Clouds rolled beneath them like an ever-changing landscape, beautiful, indifferent, and vast. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, but it was temporary. The demands of life on the ground remained relentless, lurking behind every maneuver. Mid-flight, the hum of the engines was interrupted by the static of air traffic control. A minor technical glitch required Michael's immediate attention. Instruments flickered, sensors indicated anomalies, and the calm order of the flight deck was tested. He communicated with the crew, his voice steady, precise, betraying nothing of the internal alert that surged like an electric current. Each decision was critical, each adjustment measured with exacting care. The storm that had been predicted earlier approached with silent inevitability. Thunderclouds gathered, dark and imposing, transforming the sky into a chaotic canvas of shadows and light. Michael's hands gripped the yoke instinctively, guiding the aircraft with the skill of someone who had faced countless challenges, yet knew that nature always retained its ultimate authority. Passengers murmured nervously, unaware of the layers of experience that worked invisibly to keep them safe. Lightning cracked across the horizon, illuminating the interior of the cabin in stark flashes. Michael's eyes scanned instruments in the darkened sky simultaneously, a constant oscillation between technical precision and intuitive judgment. He felt the weight of every life aboard the plane pressing silently against his consciousness. The turbulence intensified, and for a brief, suspended moment, The human heart and mechanical mastery collided in stark, beautiful tension. Landing preparation was meticulous. The runway awaited like a thin ribbon of certainty amidst the storm's chaos. Michael guided the descent with care, balancing speed, altitude, and angle with the meticulousness of a seasoned craftsman. Wheels met asphalt with a precise, controlled impact. Relief washed over him momentarily, tempered immediately by awareness that safety was only the current chapter. The story of life extended beyond the airstrip. Back on the ground, the crew began their post-flight routines. Passengers disembarked with expressions of relief, gratitude, or simple indifference. Michael remained momentarily in the cockpit, savoring the silence and solitude that followed. The stillness was brief. The airport's rhythm called him back to reality. There were always checks, always preparations for the next flight, always the unspoken responsibility of maintaining perfection amidst imperfection. Later, Michael walked through the airport concourse. His uniform, though meticulously maintained, bore subtle signs of strain from the day's flight, creases, smudges, and the faint sheen of perspiration. He caught his reflection in a window and stared at the man who had navigated countless storms, saved innumerable lives, yet felt increasingly distant from the world outside the cockpit. The uniform symbolized competence, authority, and reliability, but it also carried a shadow of isolation. Returning home, he attempted the rituals that had once offered comfort: exercise, a quick meal, a call to family. Yet even these actions felt hollow, incomplete. The threads of human connection, stretched thin by decades of absence, frayed further with each passing day. Michael reflected on the irony. Mastery in the sky had come at the cost of mastery over his own life. The skills that ensured the safety of strangers had not translated into the courage to sustain relationships, nurture friendships, or cultivate love. That night, lying awake, he considered the path he had chosen. Dreams of youth, vivid and unburdened, seemed like distant memories, softened by time and the accumulation of duty. Yet within the quiet contemplation there was a spark, a recognition that the human spirit, though taxed, retained the capacity for renewal, for choice, for reaching beyond the routine toward meaning. Michael closed his eyes, the hum of the city below blending with the distant echo of engines past. He understood that the sky offered more than freedom. It offered perspective. And perspective, though it could not erase the past, could illuminate the path forward. Tomorrow would demand excellence once again, but tonight allowed reflection, acknowledgement, and the subtle, profound courage of simply being human. Pilot Story, Chapter 4. Before we dive in, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more cinematic, immersive stories about life, work, and the struggles behind the uniform. The airport at dawn carried a stillness unlike the chaotic energy of midday. The world outside moved in slow rhythms, shadows stretching long across asphalt and concrete, and Michael felt a rare sense of serenity as he approached the terminal. The cold morning air brushed against his face, carrying faint scents of jet fuel and damp pavement. In these quiet moments before the roar of engines and the chatter of passengers, he found the rarest commodity: time to think. Yet, even in solitude, the mind was relentless. Thoughts of the previous flight lingered, of the way the storm had tested him, of the invisible responsibilities he carried with each ascent and descent. Michael considered the passengers he had safely delivered, faces blurred in memory, yet distinct in their silent trust. A life in the air was a paradox: intense focus, yet isolation; freedom, yet bound by the unyielding chain of duty. Inside the cockpit, the instruments glowed with familiar precision. Michael ran through the pre-flight checklist, each movement deliberate, each lever and dial familiar through years of repetition. The plane hummed with potential energy, a sleeping giant awaiting command. He allowed himself a small smile, a private acknowledgement of mastery and familiarity. Yet beneath it, tension hummed like a taut string. Flying was never only about skill, it was about vigilance, foresight, and the ability to shoulder invisible weights. Takeoff was a ritual, sacred in its own right. As engines roared to life, Michael felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the controlled chaos that came from orchestrating immense machinery against the forces of gravity. The runway stretched before him, a narrow ribbon of certainty amidst a vast expanse of possibility. He guided the plane upward with precision, muscles and mind synchronizing in a seamless, almost unconscious dance. Above the clouds, the world transformed. Sunlight fractured across endless waves of white, an ethereal ocean in which Michael navigated with the calm of one who had memorized its currents. Yet even here, high above mundane concerns, life's pressures intruded. Thoughts of personal connections, of the void of companionship crept in, subtle yet insistent. The higher he climbed, the more the human element pressed against him, a reminder that mastery in the cockpit did not equate to mastery of the self. Mid-flight turbulence arrived unannounced, a jolt of reality against the serene backdrop. Michael's hands tightened on the yoke, eyes scanning the horizon and the instruments with equal intensity. The plane swayed, caught in currents invisible to the passengers below. A few murmurs of discomfort echoed through the cabin, but Michael's voice remained calm, a steady anchor in the storm. Each adjustment, each micro-correction was a negotiation with forces beyond control, a delicate balance of technical skill and intuition. Communication with air traffic control became a delicate ballet. Minor deviations required precise updates. Every command had consequences. Michael felt the invisible presence of his crew, stewardesses, co-pilots, ground personnel, as though the entire ecosystem of aviation depended on his decisions. Responsibility was not abstract. It was visceral, immediate, and unrelenting. One miscalculation could cascade into disaster. Yet with every challenge faced, a quiet pride emerged, tempered by awareness of the stakes. As the flight progressed, Michael reflected on his career, the arc of years defined by ambition, skill, and solitude. Early dreams of adventure and freedom had intertwined with professional rigor, shaping a life of high achievement and personal sacrifice. Friends had been distant, family connections sporadic. The cockpit offered clarity, but it also demanded detachment. Each ascent was a reminder of what had been gained and what had been lost. Landing approached with the careful precision of a surgical procedure. Instruments indicated ideal vectors, runway lights stretched into clarity, and Michael's hands moved with unwavering control. The descent was smooth, almost imperceptible to passengers, but each adjustment was a calculated negotiation with gravity, weather, and time. The wheels touched down with quiet authority, and relief swept through him, a satisfaction born not of accomplishment, but of survival and responsibility. Once on the tarmac, the post-flight routines began. Passengers disembarked, expressions ranging from gratitude to exhaustion. Michael remained in the cockpit for a moment longer, allowing himself to absorb the fleeting quiet. The airport buzzed around him, a rhythm of preparation for the next flight, the next challenge, the next day. His reflection in the glass reminded him of a man shaped by experience, endurance, and isolation, a figure both competent and profoundly human. Later, walking through the concourse, Michael observed travelers navigating their own journeys. Families reunited, business people hurried past, and children laughed with reckless abandon. For a brief moment, he envied their simplicity, their freedom to engage without the omnipresent weight of responsibility. Yet he recognized the privilege embedded in his own path, the ability to navigate the skies, to witness the world from a perspective few could imagine, to command forces that many feared. At home, solitude awaited. Rituals of rest and reflection had lost some of their comfort. The repetition of days, flights, and responsibilities pressed against him. Yet Michael embraced the quiet, understanding it as both a challenge and an opportunity. He contemplated relationships never fully realized, connections weakened by distance and choice, and the invisible costs of a life committed to mastery. The cockpit had taught him control, precision, and endurance, but it had also illuminated the gaps left in human connection. Night descended with a gentle inevitability. Michael lay awake, listening to the subtle hum of the city, the distant echo of engines past, and the quiet rhythm of his own thoughts. He considered the fragility and resilience of life, the balance between duty and desire, freedom and responsibility. Each decision, each flight, each day in the sky had forged him, but it also offered lessons in humility, patience, and perspective. Within the stillness, he recognized the human capacity for adaptation and growth. Mastery in the air had its price, but it also provided clarity, a lens through which to view the world and oneself. He understood that tomorrow would demand the same precision, vigilance, and courage, but tonight allowed reflection, acknowledgement, and the subtle, profound act of simply being. Pilot Story. Chapter 5, Intro CTA. Before we start, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to follow Michael's journey as a pilot, facing the highs and lows of life, work, and personal sacrifice. The morning arrived with a reluctant brightness. Sunlight crept across the horizon, pale and diffused, struggling to penetrate the lingering fog that hugged the airfield. Michael stood by the edge of the tarmac, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, absorbing the cold and the quiet. The world was awake, yet still hesitant, and he felt, for a fleeting moment, the rare freedom of being untethered from schedules and responsibilities. Flight preparation was always meticulous, a ritual of respect for both machinery and life. Michael approached the cockpit with a solemn acknowledgement of what lay ahead. The plane awaited like a patient sentinel, its wings reflecting the first fragile rays of sunlight. He ran through the pre-flight checklist, each item a tactile reminder of the precision demanded by his profession. Systems hummed to life, instruments lit in soft blues and greens, and the cockpit became a sanctuary of controlled chaos. Takeoff was the culmination of anticipation. Michael eased the throttle forward, the engines responding with a low, powerful roar. The runway stretched beneath him like an endless promise, and he guided the plane upward with exacting care. Every ascent was both familiar and extraordinary, the simultaneous thrill of speed, altitude, and the delicate dance with gravity that defined his life in the air. As the plane broke through the cloud layer, Michael's mind began to drift, a rare lapse in the constant focus that flying demanded. He thought of the lives that intersected with his own at these heights. Passengers trusting him with fragile bodies, colleagues depending on his decisions, and family members whose absence weighed heavily. The sky offered perspective but demanded respect. The higher he climbed, the more acutely he felt the responsibility that tethered him, invisible yet unyielding. Turbulence appeared suddenly, a jolt that reminded him of the unpredictability of life. The plane swayed, a powerful yet controlled motion, and Michael's hands moved instinctively, correcting and countering. Through the cabin, the subtle murmurs of unease were met with calm instructions, his voice steady, an anchor for those unaware of the delicate ballet unfolding above. He marveled at how life, like flight, often required poise under pressure, each choice rippling across countless unseen consequences. Mid-flight, a storm revealed its power. Clouds thickened, lightning flashed in the distance, and rain lashed against the fuselage with relentless insistence. Michael's eyes scanned instruments and horizon alike, calculating adjustments, maintaining composure. The crew communicated seamlessly, a quiet symphony of professionalism and trust. In those moments, Michael felt the paradox of control, absolute command over the aircraft, yet complete vulnerability to forces beyond human mastery. Memories surfaced, unbidden. He recalled early days of flight training when mistakes had been costly in lessons if not in lives. The intense hours of study, the painstaking repetition, the nights spent balancing ambition against exhaustion, all of it had forged resilience. He understood now that mastery was as much about endurance as skill, and that every successful flight carried the invisible weight of past failures, each lesson etched into instinct and reflex. As the storm subsided, a sense of calm returned. Michael guided the plane through clear skies, adjusting altitudes, monitoring weather reports, and maintaining course. The passengers, perhaps unaware of the storm's full intensity, remained serene, lulled by his competence and the gentle hum of the aircraft. He allowed himself a moment of quiet pride, tempered by humility. Success in aviation was fleeting, fragile, yet profoundly satisfying when achieved through diligence and care. Hours passed with the steady rhythm of the skies. Michael reflected on his personal life, or lack thereof. Relationships had always been difficult to maintain, stretched thin by distance, schedules, and priorities that left little room for emotional consistency. Friends drifted away, family ties grew sporadic, and he existed in a delicate balance between professional fulfillment and personal void. Yet he realized that the discipline required in his career mirrored a certain clarity in life, decisions, consequences, and the inevitable need to navigate both with skill. Landing approached with its own tension. Instruments indicated optimal vectors. The runway stretched into sharp clarity, and Michael's hands guided the plane with unwavering precision. Each adjustment, no matter how minor, demanded attention. Every movement carried potential consequences. The wheels met asphalt smoothly, a whisper of authority against the roar of engines and friction. Relief and satisfaction intertwined, success defined not by applause, but by the quiet acknowledgement of competence and survival. On the tarmac, the routine unfolded. Passengers disembarked, luggage moved with efficiency, and ground crew carried out checks with practiced diligence. Michael remained in the cockpit for a few additional moments, savoring the calm, absorbing the fleeting stillness. The airport was alive with motion, yet within the cockpit time felt suspended, a rare pocket of reflection in a life defined by continuous motion. Later, walking through the concourse, Michael observed travelers navigating their own stories. Families reunited with laughter and tears, business people hustled with urgency, and children's carefree joy illuminated the mundane. He envied none of it, yet he acknowledged the contrast between their worlds and his own. The freedom he had in the skies came at a cost: emotional distance, sacrificed relationships, and solitude. Yet, within that cost, he found a purpose and clarity unavailable to those tethered to ordinary routines. Evening arrived with the muted hues of twilight. Michael returned to his apartment, a small space organized for functionality rather than comfort. He prepared a simple meal, the quiet of the city seeping through the windows. Thoughts of flights past and future circled, interlaced with reflections on ambition, choices, and sacrifice. The solitude that once felt isolating had transformed into a lens for perspective, a medium through which he could analyze his own trajectory with both rigor and compassion. Night settled with inevitability. Michael lay awake, listening to the hum of distant traffic, the occasional roar of a departing plane, and the subtle rhythm of his own heartbeat. Life in the air was demanding, unforgiving, and exhilarating. It offered mastery over one dimension while highlighting vulnerability in all others. He understood that each day, each flight, each decision was a chance to confront limits, assert skill, and navigate the delicate balance between professional excellence and personal fulfillment. In the quiet darkness, he contemplated the future. Tomorrow would demand more: early departures, challenging weather, and the unrelenting attention of flight. Yet, it also promised discovery, new routes, unique perspectives, and the subtle triumphs that defined a life committed to mastery. Michael embraced the paradox: control and vulnerability, isolation and purpose, risk and reward. The sky remained his domain, a canvas of infinite challenges and possibilities, and he would continue to navigate it with resolve, courage, and a deep appreciation for the human capacity to endure and prevail. End of Chapter 5. If you're following Michael's journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with the next chapters of this cinematic emotional pilot story.